the stagnation that occurred in the Soviet Union after 1975, not largely due to his failure. It is precisely because the Soviet system developed so successfully before. In the past, the Soviet Union was poor and deserted. Many serfs turn over and become masters. Take some strict discipline measures against them. Give some material rewards. Commit to them. The enthusiasm of the people across the country will be fully utilized, mobilized, but it developed into the 1970s. The Soviet workers are no longer the generations of the past. Most people become very good at education. Modern citizens who have reached a moderate level of life. But the Soviet system, it's still the requirement of high centralization from top to bottom. There is a conflict with the system of obedience. That is to say, the Soviet model founded in the 1920s. The tricks to use have been exhausted. Major reforms are imperative. The Soviet system was in the late 1920s. That is, half a century after its birth. There have been many weaknesses and problems in economic operation. This bothered Soviet officials. It also troubled the Soviet people. Then a large number of Western critics of the Soviet system repeatedly said, "You are strong in military affairs, but your economy is not good. What's the use of making many tanks and rockets?" The people are not happy. The people's pursuit of a better life has not come true. So many people say, "You see, the Soviet system is not good." But since 1928, until the mid-70s, the Soviet economy still looks very good. Friendly and hostile observers admit this. But the Soviet Union's economic situation was after 1975. It's a very dramatic adjustment. This manifests itself in many ways. The most eye-catching aspect, it is the sharp slowdown in economic growth. Later, in 1985, Gorbachev takes the stage. Begin reform. His coming to power is the result of the dissatisfaction of the people with many long-standing problems in the Soviet system. It is also a sense of crisis caused by the rapid economic slowdown since 1975. At the beginning of the 20th century. Not many people know about it yet. Dispute started after 1928. Soviet experience. Then the dispute will be resolved. After all, the Soviet Union looks okay, no matter what problems exist in the system. After all, it did not show much in feasibility. The opposite, after 1929, Western capitalist countries stumbled into the 10-year-old Great Depression. However, the Soviet economy began a period of rapid industrialization. 1932. The equipment installed in the Soviet Union. 78% rely on imports. By around 1936. In 1937, only less than 10% of the equipment has been imported. All the others are made in China. The speed of Soviet industrialization, much faster than many developed countries. In the 12 years from 28 to 40 years, a large amount of Soviet labor was transferred from agriculture. This takes at least 30 to 50 years in other countries. 1941. The Soviet Union was involved in World War II. The industrial foundation built at that time. It's enough to produce all the weapons at that time, including tanks and cannon fighter jets. The war did cause serious damage to the Soviet Union. 1945. The most economically developed region in the Soviet Union. Its industrial output value is only about 30% of the pre-war period. But the Soviet Union recovered very quickly after the war. 1950. Its industrial output value has exceeded its pre-war level. In the following decades, the Soviet economy has also been growing very rapidly. The Soviet Union actually valued economic indicators very much. Because according to Marx's theory, capitalisme fait supérieur, because the capitalist system has developed well, growing fast. Then we must achieve faster growth than capitalism. The ultimate goal of this rapid economic growth. It is not an endless increase in consumer product output, but ultimately, We must achieve comprehensive prosperity. Everyone's material things must be satisfied. Can concentrate on activities that are more advanced than material consumption. Therefore, all the leaders of the Soviet Union attach great importance to economic growth. Only through rapid economic development. That's how it could be achieved. And military threats from capitalist countries. It also prompted the Soviet Union to grow faster. Because of the continuous strong growth, it is a necessary basis for the military strength of the modern world. Rapid growth ensures the survival of the country. According to the official statistics of the Soviet Union, the Soviet economy from 1928 to 1975, always soaring, 28 to 40 years. The average annual growth rate reaches 14.9%. 1950 to 75, the average annual growth is 8%. Of course, this is the Soviet Union's own statistics. But even according to Western standards, the growth of the Soviet Union was also very considerable. Let's not talk about the recovery period during World War II and after the war. The Soviet Union is growing very fast, and it's much faster than the U.S. economy during the same period. According to the CIA's estimates, around 1975, the GDP of the Soviet Union is close to 60% of that of the United States. That's the level. What is this reason? Control the distribution of domestic output. It won't be periodic. The impact of the Great Depression of capitalism. Well, this is common in Western countries. There are often periodic depressions. And compared to capitalist countries, the Soviet economy also reached a very high employment rate. Because of the Soviet Union's employment policy, it is to encourage every adult to participate in labor. Labor is the right of the people. It is also of great help in improving labor efficiency. After World War II, domestic consumption begins to grow rapidly. The quality of life of the people has actually been greatly improved. 1960, there was one radio in every 2 households in the Soviet Union, 1 TV per 10 families, 1 refrigerator per 25 households. By 1985, on average, every household has these consumer goods. But in the end, it is planners of the Soviet economy. It really puts consumer goods in a secondary position, and they have also been very successful on this road. 1957, the first artificial satellite came to the sky. 1975, Soviet Union in steel and cement, metal cutting machinery, tractor, combined harvester. These outputs have exceeded those of the United States. Wheat in agriculture, fish pig, milk, cotton production is higher than that of the United States. So industrial and technological achievements. The Soviet Union can compete with the U.S. imperialists. We can also say that it is precisely due to the Soviet system. Only then did such a backward and semi-developed country be launched, made the Soviet Union one of the 2 superpowers. But we all know the outcome later. The Soviet system is over so soon. Then something must be wrong. There are some places that are very fragile. There are political problems. Economically, there will be no exception. Let's look back. The final statistics from the West and the Soviet Union tell us the same story, the Soviet economy, just before the mid-1970s. After making great progress, I fell into a serious dilemma. This turn is so sudden. This is so big. Stalin's successor, Khrushchev, came to power. But it's not complete. The problem still exists. Wait until the early days of Brezhnev's arrival. Keshkin carried out an economic reform in 1965. Didn't succeed either. Products produced in the Soviet Union, although the quality is improved relatively quickly, but the quality is unstable. Some products are of higher quality. For example, weapons, a voyage, metal products, spaceship, battery, chemicals. But many Soviet products, especially the quality of consumer goods, is very poor. And it is not good for quality of production raw materials or consumer products. What about the entire Soviet economy? Always accompanied by a certain supply shortage. So the result is to allow the producer to decide. What do they produce? They never think about what consumers really need. People buy things. It depends on a retail distribution system. This system seems to be torture the people specifically. If you were a Soviet civilian, to buy something, there are often three queues. One is registration. One is payment. Another one is pickup. When will the product be available? It's never been decided. The common people had to take big bags to the store to buy things. It's just that you may have wanted the product you've always wanted. Suddenly, there were very few consumer services in the Soviet Union, and the quality is very low. Companies are afraid of shortage of certain important raw materials or originals. Often, a large amount of useless inventory will be stored. They even just produced these originals and spare parts. This leads to a result. A large number of enterprises. It had to exchange products on the gray market. On the other hand, agriculture is also a difficult problem. Although after the war, the Soviet Union invested a lot of labor and capital in agriculture, but can't provide the people with high quality and delicious food. The root of many problems in the Soviet economy is just that it's too concentrated, too rigid planning system. Moscow's highest authority also issued many decisions. Very detailed, but such a detailed decision, such a detailed plan, can it be implemented in full swing? Of course there is no, because they don't create effective incentives. Under this system, almost all rights are given to the producer. The rights of consumers are minimal. That was before 1975, when the entire system maintains a rapid growth. Many things are just complaining about making small adjustments. But after 1975, growth suddenly starts to slow down. Long-term accumulation problem. It suddenly became very serious. From a historical perspective, all countries are realizing when the transformation from agricultural economy to industrial economy, finally, they will experience a slowdown in growth. But the Soviet Union took this path in the mid-1970s. It seems more difficult, more dramatic, because of its operating indicators. Suddenly, it became stagnant. From 1975 to 1985, it is known as a stagnation period in the Soviet Union. Suddenly, the Soviet system felt like it was suddenly shut down. The gap between the Soviet Union and the United States is not getting smaller and smaller, but it's getting bigger and bigger. Because since 1928, the gap between the Soviet Union and Western capitalist countries has been narrowing. In a few fields, the Soviet Union has even surpassed the Western level. However, in the 1970s, the technological gap is beginning to widen, just like the economic gap. The most obvious one, the Soviet Union to a large extent. He couldn't absorb the computers, a result and dividend of the communication and information revolution. And it was precisely after the computer and information revolution in the 1970s rapidly changed the economy of the entire Western capitalist world. While the economy is stagnating, the social and political problems of the Soviet system are becoming more and more serious. This period, corruption and complaints are various institutions that spread across the Soviet society. More and more people are drinking. What about during Brezhnev's reign? Any minor reform is basically impossible, because he is famously conservative, but relying on the inertia of a strong system. Brezhnev ruled for a full 18 years from 1964 to 1982. The problem is not big in the early stages of him. November 1982. Brezhnev died. The successor, Andropov. Then he wanted to inject some new vitality into the old Soviet system. Andropov was born in the KGB. About the issue of accumulation of the Soviet system, he was clear. He launched a corruption purge. Efficient exercise. He has presided over many new experiments on economic management methods. Want to increase motivation for work. Promote technological innovation. And it is very important. Andropov encourages economic problems in the Soviet system. Conduct a relatively open discussion. But it's unfortunate. Andropov was not in power for long. His kidneys are hopeless. Before any major change begins, he's off the line. February 1984. But since Brezhnev, they have always been in power. This Chernenko is already old enough. He can only be a temporary transitional figure. Died a year later. Gorbachev, who took over Chernenko. Finally, no longer old men. Gorbachev is very energetic. very diligent in work, very sociable. There is another reason. Gorbachev is an Andropov fellow countryman. So Gorbachev is highly appreciated and valued. Therefore, during Andropov's reign, Gorbachev climbed very fast. When Chernenko took over Andropov, although it is in the traditional way, everyone believes that Gorbachev is the backbone of the reformists. Then you won't be in an environment like the Soviet Union. Many Brezhnev's fellows. Everyone wants to squeeze Gorbachev out. He wasn't squeezed out. It's because the call for reform on a larger scale has begun to overwhelm everything. It's really impossible to reform the country without reforming it. So Gorbachev became the new Soviet leader. After Stalin, no leader of the Soviet Union had absolute authority. Compared with any boss in the Western polity. Because although you have various interest groups inside you, you are in conflict with you. Let's misinterpret your order. There are no opposition parties. There are no disobedient media talks. Major reforms need to be implemented. Then there will be huge energy to implement reform. At the beginning, Gorbachev was just a minor repair. But in just 1 year of administration, Gorbachev saw that this problem is very serious. In-depth reforms are needed. So at a party congress in February 1986, Gorbachev announces, the current situation is that a thorough reform is needed. In those speeches and articles by Gorbachev in 1987, we can see his analysis of the main problems faced by the Soviet system. There are poor consumer goods quality, insufficient supply, lack of consumer services, huge waste of funds, etc. So Gorbachev emphasized it very much. One importance of reversing the current economic stagnation. He said the country had already started to lose momentum in the second half of the 1970s. The most noteworthy thing is, the Soviet Union lags behind in scientific and technological development. This is not because the Soviet Union had no scientific foundation. It's because of economic reform, indifferent to innovation. Then why did the powerful Soviet Union begin to stagnate and fall behind? He believes it's simply the Soviet system problem. He criticized this traditional Soviet model. It said that it's developing to this stage. The Soviet system used to be a positive role. Can't play anymore. Gorbachev stressed. The traditional Soviet model has two disadvantages. The first disadvantage is that the central command is above everything else. Many unreasonable economic consequences are what it causes. The second disadvantage is the lack of effective work motivation. No one has the passion to work. Eat a big pot rice. Lacks labor discipline. So how do you prescribe the prescription after the diagnosis? Gorbachev proposed the solution. Completely transform the Soviet economic system. Gorbachev argues, the goal of reform should be excessive concentration of reform. The key foundations of reviving Soviet society. The second big move is to introduce market economy components. Gorbachev pointed out in these speeches and articles in 1984 ways to solve economic problems faced by the Soviet system. It is to strengthen the power of the market. He asked the company to be put on the basis of self-profit and loss. Combine reforms in all aspects. Gorbachev has made it clear again and again. Gorbachev also believes it. If everyone's interests are truly taken into account, it will be supported by the majority of people. In Gorbachev's thoughts, there is no content that includes large-scale privatization of means of production. There is no tendency to replace the planning system with free markets. But Gorbachev didn't know at this time. And this plan to stimulate full potential, it's the end. Maybe it's counterproductive. Releases great negative energy to break up the Soviet system. And everything he did was exactly what he didn't want to see, paving the way for Western-style capitalism.